As part of the American Cities Climate Challenge, we partnered with OUC and the Science Center to bring the Orlando Tiny Greenhouse today. Visitors have an opportunity to engage in a lot of cool interactive features that will be guiding them on how to save money and reduce their environmental impact. Even though this technology has evolved, not everybody can afford EV or solar right now, so there's a lot of other great highlights of low cost and no cost opportunities to save residents money that you'll learn about when you visit the home. And the greenhouse is on wheels, so we're going to be able to take it around the community and have people enjoy it and learn from it in various different areas of our community.
Trailing Thoughts from Katy Way Trail. This trail is so wide. I like to think that Katy was the name of the engineer designing the trail, and that someone came by and said, "Do you really think the trail needs to be 12 feet wide?" And she replied, "It's the Katy Way."
Good morning and welcome to the 2022-23 Budget and Community Building Investment Workshop. Last few years, COVID has impacted and created greater challenges than we've ever experienced as a community, and I'm proud that we will continue to be here for our residents and businesses, providing the critical services and programs and amenities that they rely on from their municipal government. We adapted, we made changes, we remained flexible, and we never stopped serving. It's a tribute that our committed and compassionate City of Orlando employees have done so well in the last 2.5 years. Because of their hard work and our strong financial management, we've continued, even during the pandemic, to maintain a balanced budget. And today, we're going to outline a proposed budget that will allow us to deliver core city services while continuing to work to support our at-risk youth, enhance our community response teams in OPD, and make further investments in affordable housing. And we're able to do this without raising the millage rate for the 9th consecutive year. We've seen other cities across the nation that did struggle financially from the pandemic's impacts, and many were forced to slash budgets and to cut vital services, and that's why the federal government prioritized the American Rescue Plan Act to spur recovery for our communities. But because of our strong financial footing that existed long before the pandemic, we don't have to use the federal funding that we receive to plug holes in our budget. Instead, we can use our ARPA dollars to enable us to make a significant investment in addressing two of the most daunting challenges our city and region face: homelessness and affordable housing. So as part of the budget workshop today, our staff is going to present recommendations on how we can invest this money to create the greatest impact and spur positive, lasting change. We're calling this approach Accelerate Orlando because the focus is on affordable housing and homelessness, and it isn't new to our community. Right now, we're housing close to 400 previously homeless individuals in permanent supportive housing. Over the past few years, we've invested more than $43 million to create and preserve housing options for residents at all income levels. And that investment has helped more than 2,000 families have a safe place that they can call home. This federal funding we received gives us the opportunity to accelerate these efforts like never before. It allows us to make the most significant investment in our region's history to care for those experiencing homelessness and expand affordable housing opportunities, accelerating our efforts to eliminate barriers to prosperity. Today's workshop will also include our annual budget presentation and an outline of Accelerate Orlando. The There'll be several speakers today, but first up is Deputy Chief Financial Officer Michelle McCrimmon. Michelle.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. So I'm happy to be here to present to you the fiscal year 2023 budget workshop. When we went into the 2023 budget season, we were really uncertain about what 2023 was going to be like. We asked for flat budgets from our departments, and we asked for them to justify any increases in costs or increases in programming that they were proposing. Since then, we've watched the Consumer Price Index, CPI, go up every month. And in fact, the last June report reported an increase of 9.1% over the last 12 months, the largest 12-month increase since 1981. We've also seen some serious supply chain issues impacting us with new vehicles, HVAC systems, computers, and commodities. You've seen some of those items come through your council agendas where vendors have come back with adjustments to contracts because of those increases in commodities. We've also seen the Federal Reserve raise interest rates. They're trying to fight some of this inflation as well. And so, but slowing inflation and economic growth can possibly cause a recession. So we have that kind of looming out there. And then you'll hear that some of our larger obligations, our pension obligations, went down this year, which was great, but our returns on our investments are much lower than our assumed rate of return. So we know we may have beat that this year, but next year, in the next few years, we won't see that as much. And our bargaining unit agreements expire September 30th, 2022. And so bargaining those increases is really an unknown at this time. And there's also never a shortage of roofs or HVACs to replace. We've got a lot of investments to make in technology, and especially continuing to harden our cybersecurity controls. And we invest in solar. We've got a goal of being 100% powered by solar by the year 2030. And so those investments are also important for us to continue those goals. But despite all of this, we're looking around, we see economic recovery. We hear the tourist development tax numbers going up. Sales tax numbers are going up. Tourism is back. And housing prices have skyrocketed. And so you're going to hear that our revenues for fiscal year 23 have increased. And so we're going to help us to weather some of these challenges that we have going into this next year. The good news is we're also going into fiscal year 2023 with strong reserves. We're at the high end, just above the high end of our reserve policy maximum. And this helps us not only to be fiscally responsible, because this is like a savings account, so to speak, but it also helps us in the market. When the rating agencies come and look at our finances, that's one of the first things they ask is about our reserves and where those stand. When we go out into the market to borrow money, this helps us retain competitive rates out in the market as well. And then when we go into seasons with disasters, with hurricanes, this helps us to, pay those cleanup costs, pay those overtime costs that we incur while we're waiting on reimbursement from FEMA. So these are our fiscal year 2023 general fund proposed revenues. Just like in prior years, I'm going to focus primarily on the general fund. It's about 61% of the city's total budget and really represents, the vast majority of our operating departments. And then we'll touch on a few other significant funds later in the presentation. So you can see that our general fund revenues have increased to just over $600 million, or 10.3%. And we're going to discuss the the larger components of the pieces that make up our general fund in the next few slides, but right away, you can see what jumps out is the significant increase in our property taxes of over 32 million and 13.2%. So this is a trend of our property taxes. As the mayor mentioned, we've got no increase in millage proposed, but property taxes are the biggest portion of our general fund budget. It's 47% of our budget. And the estimate that we have here in the budget is based on preliminary estimates that we just received last month in June. And so it represents taxable values have increased by 13%, and then not a surprise, market values increased by about 20%. So when you look at the trends, you can see, starting in 2015 up until last year, a fairly steady increase. We've got increase in population, increase in taxable values. That's going to be a combination of new construction and appreciation. And while we don't have a complete set of data to analyze for this year, there's a couple of factors that are built into this fiscal year 23 property tax number. First of all, we know about 25% is new construction. Last year, that percentage was a lot larger of the increase, but this year it's about 25%. And that's residential, but that's also commercial construction as well. And then the remaining increase is going to be from increase in value, right? That makes sense. But what's different about 2022 is the impact from CPI. So the Save Our Homes caps the increases for residential homes, homestead homes at 3%. So it's the lower of 3% or CPI. And until 2008, CPI has always been less than 3%. But this time around, it's more than 3%. And so that cap is now at 3% rather than less than 3%. So that's something that's very different for this fiscal year. We also saw an increase in non-homestead properties. So the non-homestead properties have a 10% cap rather than a 3% cap. So that's going to impact those values as well because of that higher cap. And then we saw the percentage of parcels, so all of the parcels that are included in this assessment, the percentage of those parcels that hit the cap, hit some kind of cap, increased from 57% to 72%. And then this is just a quick reminder on the property tax side that the city's taxes represent about a third of a resident's total property tax bill. So another significant revenue source for the city are payments from OUC, which is about 17% of our general fund revenues. And that's made up of two pieces. It's our franchise fee equivalent, so that's the piece that's on the utility bill that bill payers pay, and then the remaining piece is a dividend, which is based on a percentage of the OUC net income. And while if you look at the chart, the increase from 2021 to 2023 looks significant, you'll probably recall that in 2021 and 2022, we negotiated lower payments from OUC. And that was because they had reduced demand from the drop-off in commercial sales. And then they were also trying to manage price increases for customers as well. So when you look at 2023, we're kind of just getting back on the normal cycle with them. Sales taxes are about 10% of our general fund revenues. And so this chart here, the blue represents the budget, and then the red represents the actual sales tax revenues. And then the little dotted lines on the side are where we project that will end in 2022. So this is obviously our most economically sensitive revenue line item. And so some years Those earlier years, you can see that we hit it right on. And then there's other years that the actual revenues come in a little bit higher. And then obviously 2020, we could not have anticipated that impact there. So while the revenues for fiscal year 2021 are projected to be pretty high, we also know that built into some of those increases are recession numbers. We know that if there's, inflation numbers, but we know with the potential of recession, that could impact the spend. Inflation numbers go down, that could impact it. So we've included a decent increase in the 2023 projection, but we didn't want to be, we still wanted to remain conservative because of any impacts. We don't want that to impact our budgets. Charges for services is about 10% of our general fund revenues. And the name is always a little bit deceiving because the green on that chart there, which is about 2/3 of that revenue, are charges to the general fund, but they're to other funds within the city. So they're internal charges, essentially. And it's to recover cost allocations, so the cost of accounting, the cost of legal, and things like that, that other departments would theoretically, and other funds would theoretically have to purchase themselves. And the actual piece that's charged to external customers is in that yellow and orange. And you can see that basically those have gone up somewhat, but it's to get back to kind of our pre-pandemic, our pre-COVID revenue levels. So on the expenditure side, as I mentioned earlier, considerations in this budget were the impacts of inflation and supply chain issues. A lot of these issues were not anticipated when we put together our 2022 budget. Who knew that everything would go up so significantly and for such a long period of time? And so we've seen it across the board. We've seen it in electricity costs, in fleet, fuel, solar, construction, healthcare. And so within our fiscal 2023 budget, we've got additional fuel costs of over $2 million because everybody has seen that at the pump, and that affects us no different than everyone else. Electricity, so the recent fuel price increases from OUC have impacted us by over $1 million. The budgets reflect an increase in the healthcare premiums of about 4.5%. Still lower than industry average, but nonetheless an increase for us. Families, Parks and Recreation had to adjust their hourly rates for their temp seasonals to be able to recruit and retain employees to provide those necessary services to our families and children. And then vehicle replacement costs, those have gone up significantly, about $1.7 million. So not just for the sales prices now that are going on, but just in general, the costs have gone up. And so we know when we need to go out and replace those vehicles, if not this year, in the next few years, those costs are higher. And then we have other challenges as well. We've got IT equipment costs that have challenges as well, and then construction. So lots of considerations that have gone into this new budget. So because we present a balanced budget to you, the expenses have also gone up by $56 million or 10%. And I'll highlight a couple of items, but in the next few slides, we'll get into the details by department. The first line here is salaries and wages, and it's by far the largest category of our general fund expenses. It's about 37% of the total budget. And with all collective bargaining agreements expiring and in current negotiations, budgeting this line is challenging. On the benefits side, I mentioned to you there is a increase in our healthcare plan, but that's offset by decreases in our police and fire pension plans as well. So the impact of that increase isn't as significant. But as I mentioned before, we do anticipate those pension plan obligations to increase in future years. And then fleet charges. So reflective through, any of the departments that have vehicles, those fleet charges are also included in here. So it's the higher gas and then the vehicle replacement costs. So if we look at just a different slice of the general fund expenditures by percentage of type of expense, you can see that salaries and wages and benefits is a significant part of our budget. It's 60% of our general fund budget. And then when you look on the far right-hand side, the breakdown of the benefits, the vast majority of the benefit costs is our police and fire retirement plans, our health insurance, and then payroll taxes. That makes up over 70% of our benefit costs. And then the next biggest chunk of expenses are the other operating expense of 13%. And then down on the far right-hand side of that chart, you can see the breakdown of those other operating expenses. The tax increment payments, those are the payments that go to the CRA. And then our debt service, those make up the majority of those other operating expenses. So if we look at the same information, but just broken out by departments, for the most part, increases are spread among most departments. And again, we'll get into the details of those in the next few slides when we look at each department individually. But the largest increases you can see are non-departmental, police, and FPR budgets. And again, we'll get into those details. And then this is how those department expenditures break down from a percentage perspective. You can see public safety continues to account for over half our operating budget. And just by comparison, even with our increase in property tax revenue, the public safety cost is about 51%, and property tax revenue's still less than that. It's at 47%. So our property taxes still do not cover the full cost of our public safety. The one item of note in non-departmental, that percentage has grown from the prior year, and that's primarily, you're going to hear more about this, but that's primarily the transfers out to the capital improvement fund to catch up on reductions that we've made in the last few years and to address some capital needs. But again, we'll get into more of those details. So we have a slide for each department, and they're all set up the same. So I'll kind of give you the lay of the land, starting with economic development. But the left side of the screen, the top left, gives you the general fund divisions that are included in the general fund budget. And then down on the bottom left are the other operating funds that roll up into the all funds portion of the budget. On the far right upper corner is the fiscal year budget. We have the dollar amount of the general fund budget for that department and the percentage increase, and then the all funds budget and that respective percentage increase. And then on the bottom right, we have any kind of program enhancements or items that are included in their budget. So this could be within the general fund budget, or it could also be any kind of capital type projects that we've included here as well. And then right in the middle is just a breakout of salaries and benefits versus all other operating costs. So it's just to get a flavor for how the different departments are set up within the general fund. So you'll see some that are fairly even. You'll see others that are much more heavy salaries and benefits. So it's really kind of just more informational. So if we focus on economic development, you can see that basically just a couple highlights on here. Primary increase for economic development in the general fund is going to be related to lawn maintenance and board up securing contracts. And they also have one new position that's been proposed for an impact fee manager. On the all funds budget, you can see a fairly significant increase, But if you'll notice, the CRA is included in the all funds, and they had, we'll go into that later, but they had a significant increase in their budget, primarily due to the property taxes. The executive offices, a lot of times I think people think, oh, the executive offices, that's just the mayor's office and the commissioners, but you can see the list of divisions that are included. There's over 10 offices that are included in executive. We did move HR out this year. They became a standalone department, so they'll have their own department slide this year. So HR and the healthcare fund is reported separately, but then we also added the Office of Equity this year as well. So that's an additional office included. And so the executive office's general fund budget increased by about 7%. The budget this year includes 10 new positions. One is in the CAO's office, one in the equity office, one in the sustainability, one in communications, and then we have 6 new positions within the commissioner offices, so one in each of your office for social media assistance. So that's included in this year's budget. We've also added about $200,000 for community organizations and mayor matching grants. And then we've got a couple of capital projects in here for the clerk's office and the communications for some items needed in there. The record management and preservation, and then a new media platform. And so I'll note that 7 of these positions are focused on improving communications and responsiveness to residents, which is great. Families, Parks, and Recreation, they had a significant budget increase of almost 9% in the general fund, and that includes 7 new positions. 6 are related to My Brother's Keeper, so it's 5 advocates and 1 supervisor, and then a park ranger supervisor. And their operating budget has increases for the Mercy Drive Kid Zone, MBK expansion, so in addition to the staffing, the new positions there, we've got some new MBK contracts that are included in the budget. And then I mentioned earlier the pay increases for their existing temporary and seasonal workers. And then we've also got funding included for the conversion of the Jackson Center to a youth center. The fire department had a 1% increase. That is, it appears to be modest, but it amounts to about $1.2 million. But some of that is their pension costs were reduced by about $1 million this year, so that does reflect that lower cost. We've also included an additional $1 million of fleet replacement charges for them. And included in the capital plan are the design of 3 new fire stations. One is Southport, which is a replacement station, and then 2 new stations in the southeast area, which is Story Park and Poitras. And so while this may look modest this year, with 3 new fire stations and equipment, and 2 of them being new with personnel, this is going to look very different in the next few years for fire. Our housing department, I'll remind you on the general fund side, it's generally personnel supported. Most of what housing does is grant supported. And so you can see that's their salary and benefits make up about 90% of their general fund budget. And they actually had a slight decrease in general funding this year. And that's primarily because the good news is they're getting $1 million more in SHIP dollars. And so that allows some of those costs to help support some of those administrative costs that were picked up by the general fund. And then we have also included $1 million for affordable housing as well. So that's included in this year's budget. As I mentioned, HR is a new department this year. And so this presents the HR department, human resources department, and then the healthcare fund. And so I mentioned before that the healthcare and really all of the department budgets reflect the premium increase of 4.5%. The business and financial services budget has increased by about 8%. The customers for the business and financial services are pretty much the departments and divisions around the city. So all of the increases in here primarily reflect additional IT contracts and equipment replacements. It's especially CAD and body-worn cameras contracts. And then there's also some IT hardware and software replacement costs that are included in the capital budgets, as well as additional facility capital projects for roofs and HVACs, and then, of course, the fuel and vehicle replacement costs as well. The police department budget has increased about 7.2%. About 2/3 of the additional funding for fiscal year 23 is related to 23 new positions that have been requested. One sworn and the rest are civilian positions. And so you can see that they range from CSOs, community service officers, to crime scene technicians, permitting technicians, public records specialists, and the communications validation specialists for the 911 center, and the e-learning developer instructional designer is for the Office of Constitutional Policing. Their budget also includes some additional, as you can imagine, their fuel and fleet charges impact them greatly, so that there's additional funding for those charges. And we also have outfitting, so any types of, community service officers that require a vehicle, they require uniforms, all of those, we have those additional costs as well included in this budget. And then from a capital side, we have about $2.25 million in equipment replacement included in their budget, as well as $2 million for a HVAC and filtration replacement at the gun range. On the public works side, most of the public works operations are actually in other operating funds, and you can see the difference between the general fund budget of $10 million and the all funds. Because the all funds includes the water reclamation fund, solid waste, stormwater, construction management. But from a general fund perspective, they have 3 new positions that have been requested in engineering survey services. And then the rest of the increase is primarily costs from increased right-of-way costs because previously they used inmates to do some of that work, but once COVID happened and they stopped that program, the state hasn't reinstituted it, and so that's impacted the cost to do that work. And then on the capital side, on the CIP side, we've increased the total pavement rehab budget to about $5 million when you combine the capital improvements fund and the gas tax fund. And then on the transportation side, most of the increases that have occurred in here on the general fund side are because of utility costs for their street lighting program. On the non-departmental side, we've got some significant changes in this fund. So we've got some increased tax increment payments of about $5.3 million. So those are the payments that go to the CRA from the increase in value of the properties within the CRA. We have about $3 million of increased debt service payments. We've included about $1.6 million in fuel contingency. So from the time that the budgets were put together to now, fuel prices have gone up. We've seen them drop a little bit, but we've got some additional contingency in here to help our departments if the fuel prices continue to remain high or if they go up again. We've also increased the transfer to the CIP fund by just over $11 million. And then we have about $4 million in additional dollars going to the designated revenue funds. So we'll go into the details on some of the capital projects that are included there. But one of the items that are included in the designated revenue fund is about a $1.6 million grant match for unanticipated grant applications. So a lot of times grant opportunities will come along and there's either a required match or maybe there's a match that helps keep us competitive. And because it was unanticipated, departments don't necessarily have those match dollars available. And so this allows us to have some dollars available for some of these important grant programs that come along. And then you'll see at the bottom there, we've increased the Greenwood Cemetery funding by about $250,000. As the number of plots at Greenwood go down and the available plots go down, they're going to be requiring some additional funding subsidies over the next few years to help keep their operations up. And then we also have an increase in our solar farm subscription included in the budget of about $650,000. So with the OUC fuel prices going up, that has now made that price differential between subscribing to the solar farm and having the traditional electricity model pretty much about the same. So this is going to allow us, we'll incur the same dollar increase, but then we'll also be able to increase our subscription percentage of solar, which will help us with our goal. And then of note, the non-departmental includes, this is where the funding is included for our community response team as well. So with all of the new position requests that have been made and all of the city services that are provided, our proposed city staffing number is roughly about 3,800 employees now. So I spent a lot of time on the general fund. We have lots of other funds, but these funds here are just kind of a highlight of funds that had significant changes or there's items of note included. So I've mentioned to you the capital improvements fund. We've increased that increase there is directly related to the additional transfers from the general fund. And again, we'll go into some details on what's included in that. The CRA fund sees a pretty significant increase, and that's directly related to the property tax increases and the funding that comes from the city's property taxes, that tax increment payment, as well as the county. The healthcare fund has increased by $6.4 million. Just a reminder, we're self-insured for healthcare, so we were talking about expenses citywide, but those are dollars that go into our healthcare fund as revenue, so that's why you see that higher dollar there. And then they take those dollars and pay out those higher costs that they anticipate to incur. The fleet funds have gone up by $6 million, the same type of concept. We've got higher fuel costs, higher vehicle replacement costs, and so all of those dollars are going into our fleet fund to pay those bills. Parking has gone up tremendously, and they took a pretty hard hit over the last few years during COVID. Fewer events downtown, fewer people coming to work downtown, and so with the recovery that's been going on, their revenues are anticipated to recover and then some. And then they're also reinstituting their transfers to the R&R fund as well with those revenue recoveries. The solid waste fund is slightly decreasing. Their budget includes a proposed 4% rate increase, but the primary reason for the decrease here is due to the reduction in their capital that's included in their budget this year. And then I mentioned earlier, our SHIP funding is anticipated to go up by about $1 million. So that's why you see the change there. The stormwater fund, those increases are primarily related to additional capital needs. And then water reclamation had a pretty significant decrease there, but their capital funding saw a significant increase last year, so that's why you see such a change this year. And then the water reclamation revenue fund includes, they're including a 5% proposed price increase in their operating budget. And I just went through all of that. So when we talk about aging infrastructure and all of these capital needs around the city, you know, this just kind of gives a quick flavor as to why, you know, all of the sewer lines that we have, recreation centers, buildings, our fleet, our sidewalk, our streets. So you just kind of look at these numbers and it's astounding, and you can just imagine all of the wear and tear and the maintenance that's needed to not only keep this up, but to the standards that we know our residents demand. And so some of the items that we've included in our capital improvement program this year, I've mentioned some of them, but the ones I haven't mentioned, you know, we've got $4 million for improvements to neighborhood centers, fields, parks, playgrounds, and pools. We've increased our roof and HVAC replacement program. We've got, and that doesn't cover all of them, but at least helps us prioritize some of the critical needs. We've got sidewalk and brick streets repair of $2.3 million. We have renewable energy and water irrigation pilot programs of $1.5 million. So that includes solar and efforts to improve our water irrigation system for water conservation. And then we've got $2.5 million for Robinson Complete Streets. And then our citywide computer replacements of $2.5 million. And when we look at our capital improvement program by fund, you can see that it's actually gone down slightly from last year by about $22 million, but the vast majority of that are the water reclamation, the changes in the water reclamation capital funding. And then when you just look at our capital improvement program by function, even though we talk about all these great projects that go citywide, our roofs, our HVACs, our all of that, when you get down to it, our capital improvement program is really, the vast majority of our spending is water reclamation, economic development, which is primarily CRA, and then transportation. So that makes up about 75% of our total capital program. So we are presenting to you it says tentatively balanced budget of over $600 million in the general fund, over $939 million in other funds, for a total city budget of over $1.5 billion. Between now and when we bring you the final budget in September, we'll be doing some refining, so some of these numbers may change between now and then. And so, but we'll go through anything that does change between now and then with you. We will also be producing the budget in brief and the commissioner notebooks, so those will be distributed to each of you within the next week. We'll get them posted on the city's website as well. And then we also have our briefings scheduled with each of you to go through any questions or provide any more details at those meetings. Today on the agenda, we've got, we're asking for your approval on the resolutions to set the tentative millage rates, no increases. And then, as I mentioned, we've got our commissioner briefings scheduled in the next few weeks, which I can't believe is going to be August. And then we have our first and second public hearings to approve the final budget in September. So on behalf of the budget team, I want to thank you, Mayor, thank you, commissioners, for your support. I want to thank our budget team, led by Martin Carmody, and the fiscal managers, the division managers, the department directors. You know, they put a lot of time and effort and care into their budget requests, and they prudently manage their budgets all year long. So I want to thank everybody for that. So I will now turn this over to our CFO, Chris McCullion. He's going to start off the presentation on Accelerate Orlando. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. And commissioners will do Q&A at the conclusion of all the presentations.
Is it that one? Got it.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. So we are switching over to talk about the Accelerate Orlando initiative. There we go. It's on your screen. The real meat of this is going to come from Kevin when we start talking about the projects that we are proposing for consideration, but I want to tee that up by talking at a high level about the American Rescue Plan. In March of 2021, President Biden signed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, and the goal was to help offset the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the key provisions in there, especially from our perspective, is the $350 billion in federal fiscal recovery aid that was approved for state and local governments. That's called the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. Under that fiscal recovery program, that money has to be obligated fully by the end of 2024 and spent by the end of 2026. And that may sound like a long way off, but it's going to come pretty quickly, and especially considering some of the projects that we're going to talk about in just a minute. It's going to take several years to get some of those things fully done, and so those timelines are pretty short for us, and so that will play into one of the considerations that I'm going to recommend to you today. Okay, the City of Orlando was awarded $58 million from the state and local fiscal recovery funds. That was not a competitive process. That was one that was allocated based on a formula that was established by the United States Treasury. And so the city's $58 million is already in the bank. We've received that from the United States Treasury, and it is waiting to be spent. That money comes with various reporting requirements, including quarterly and annual reporting. And we've already gotten a little bit of a head start on that. We have already come up on some of the reporting deadlines. So we have been filing our reporting saying we haven't spent any money yet, but we've also been saying here are some of the key priority areas that has been established by Mayor Dyer, and you're going to hear more from Kevin about those key priority areas in just a minute. We also have a city page on our website that has talked about those key priority areas, and that website will be used to report out to the community how we're spending this $58 million in one-time money. The allowable use of recovery funds, some of the main categories, you can replace lost public sector revenue. It's called revenue replacement. And you can use that money to provide government services up to the amount of the funds that were lost due to the pandemic. I'll talk about that more in just a minute. Second main category, respond to the far-reaching public health and negative economic impacts of the pandemic. That's pretty broad. You can see some of the items listed on the slide, everything from investments in community health programs to economic incentives to help offset the negative impacts of the pandemic-driven recession. And lastly, you can also invest in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So a pretty broad scope of allowable uses for this money. The thing I want to talk about in a little more detail today is the revenue replacement provision. This allows the use of the ARPA funds to pay for government services an amount equal to your revenue loss. And the United States Treasury adopted a formula. It's pretty simple. You plug in your pre-pandemic revenues, you plug in your early or post-pandemic revenues, and the formula tells you whether you've experienced a revenue loss. It's a little bit quirky because they basically assume that if your revenues were not at a certain level that anything where the revenues came in less than that level is attributed to the pandemic. And so you get to factor in growth rates, you get to look at what your actual revenues are, and when you run that formula, it tells you whether you've experienced revenue loss. Even if your revenues actually went up, by that formula, you can actually document a revenue loss and take advantage of this revenue replacement provision. Let's see. This is a key component of the American Rescue Plan. It was something that came in kind of at the 11th hour with negotiations with the National League of Cities, the various state leagues of cities, National Association of Counties. They really advocated for flexibility for local governments to be able to use this federal money in a way that helps them recover from the impacts of the pandemic. So we have used that formula for the city's revenues that were experienced pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And we can actually show that all 58 million can be used under the revenue replacement provision for the provision of government services. So all 58 million of our funds can be used. We can take advantage of this revenue replacement provision to spend all 58 million. I'll tell you more about that in just a second. Let's see. There's some reasons why, so just to cut to the chase, we are going to propose to you that we take advantage of this revenue replacement provision as a way to spend down the American Rescue Plan funds. There's a couple of reasons why we want to do that, but essentially what that will do is it will free up $58 million of city general funds that can be used in the way that you as a city council want to use it. The federal money has some restrictions that come along with it. One of the restrictions is we can't use our local preference programs. We can't use our minority and women-owned business programs. We can't use our own procurement processes for things that we anticipate going out and doing competitive procurement for. You have to follow the federal procurement requirements if you use the American Rescue Plan money for contracts, for competitively awarded contracts. There's also some complex reporting and compliance requirements with federal funds. Taking advantage of the revenue replacement category that you see on your screen enables us to streamline the reporting, and it has much more streamlined compliance requirements than some of the other categories that I showed you earlier. We also think that by avoiding the complex reporting processes, we can actually lessen the administrative expense that we would need. So that puts more of this money in play for more of our citizen-facing initiatives, rather than having to spend it on, consultants to help us with the complex revenue reporting or project reporting requirements of the federal rules. And not to get into too much detail or the weeds of the federal requirements, but some of the federal requirements are pretty strict. And so it might cause some real challenges with some of the programs that you're going to hear about from Kevin and his team later. And so we want to try to make sure we can do these really transformative projects that we have lined up, and we don't want to run into any snags with some of the complicated federal rules for federal grants. So what we are proposing is to take $58 million of general fund salary expenses across all departments. So that's what this pie chart shows you on the page. It's basically a pro rata slice of all departments. So these are all departments providing government services. That's what you're allowed to use the revenue replacement for. We would take $58 million in fiscal 22. Really it's $58 million in expenses, and we will charge that to the ARPA grant fund. So that will allow us to immediately spend down our ARPA money, close out all of our reporting requirements in this fiscal year, meet the spending deadlines that we talked about earlier, and from an ARPA perspective, we would be done. The $58 million in expenses that are transferred over then frees up $58 million in the general fund, which we would propose to transfer from the general fund into a special Accelerate Orlando fund. So segregate that money. It allows us to easily report on the expenditure of the funds. We can track every single penny. We can show to you and to the public how we spent every single penny of that by moving over to a separate fund. And so we get the benefit of the revenue replacement category by allowing us to use our own procurement processes, allowing us to use our own timelines, allowing us to use whatever requirements you all want to put into the funding agreements versus some of the federal restrictive requirements of the American Rescue Plan Act. So same $58 million worth of output, basically, but by taking advantage of the revenue replacement provision, we get to do it essentially on our terms and our timeline. So this is just a graphic. The general fund net impact is $0. So we take $58 million of expenses, we move that off to the ARPA grant fund. We take $58 million of freed up money in the general fund, and we transfer that to a separate Accelerate Orlando fund, and that's what we use to do our reporting for the projects that Kevin is going to talk about in just a second. To do this, we're going to need to amend the budget. So we have a budget review committee meeting scheduled for next week. So that will be the first recommendation by the Budget Review Committee to amend the budget to accomplish this. That will then come to you in August, and your August City Council meeting for approval of the BRC minutes and amending the budget to basically budget the salaries in the ARPA fund, budget the transfer out of the general fund, the transfer into the Accelerate Orlando fund, and we can start budgeting those for the projects that Kevin's going to discuss in a second. So that's it for my part. I'm going to transition over to Kevin. Kevin's going to step up and talk about the funding priority areas and go into more details of the projects that we're proposing.
Thank you, Chris. Morning, Mayor, Council. How are you? Excuse me. The remainder of the presentation, we're going to talk about Cindy funding project priorities, the project criteria, and the outcomes. Proposed project overviews will be presented by myself, Orrin Henry, Housing Director, who will be talking more about the affordable housing portions, Lisa Portelli, Senior Advisor to the Mayor on Homelessness and Social Services. They'll provide some context into the individual projects that we're going to present to you today. I'll then step back up and talk about 3 or more of the projects and then really discuss the next steps moving forward. The one thing I want to assure you and let you know, we are not seeking approval of all these projects today. This is presented to you conceptually so that you will understand what's in them. We understand that you're going to have comments either now or as these projects begin to move forward. We'll return with each project for separate authorization, and we'll also report to you at that point the due diligence that we've conducted at that particular time. So we're not trying to move this forward all at once. We're trying to be very methodical, yet still get these projects accomplished in a more business-like manner, and even trying to accelerate, how we accomplish that as far as providing assistance. And I'll talk a little more about that. As the mayor said, we have an opportunity to accelerate Orlando to significantly move the needle on some of these projects. This is unique in that we can actually target some areas that are so difficult, especially for local government, to take care of. Typically, you hear things like this, federal government, state government, but due to the mayor and your leadership, we're going to target some real projects, some real issues that we're trying to accomplish. Especially in those areas of housing, affordable housing, homelessness, even mental health, safety, and also employment. If you take a look at the slide that we have up here, from the onset, the mayor has been very insistent that we deliver a long-term community impact with a focus on impacting those folks that were hardest hit by the global economy. We want to foster equitable and resilient recovery for everyone across the board. We want to produce objective and measurable outcomes and results, which means we're going to evaluate these projects not only as they're being done, but also moving forward. This council has really led the way in the last year, especially some commissioners who have talked about looking at a different way in which we handle affordable housing, in which we handle homelessness, as far as making sure that we're not simply providing one individual service over and over again, but when you interact with services, you're actually interacting with services that will continue to move you forward, that will graduate you out of that particular predicament that you're in. We also want to consider operational funding impacts past the funding period. We're not targeting to do projects that we can use some of the $58 million now and move forward, and then pose some type of an artificial operational need for us 3-4 years down the road. the mayor has been very keen on talking about some very specific priorities. And these are the priorities that the city of Orlando has been looking at for several years now. Homelessness, affordable housing, broadband access, economic opportunity, and downtown revitalization. I wanted to include this chart, not because I didn't think everybody could do the math or anything of that nature, but I really wanted to show by looking at the categories so you can see exactly where we're trying to focus these dollars and the projects that we're trying to impact. As you can see, 67% go into affordable, bridge, and permanent supportive housing and homelessness. And the others are just as important, the economic opportunity, which is primarily the RISE job training program. I'll talk about that a little bit later and how that paralleled with what we did with the Blueprint program. Broadband access, bridging the digital divide. I think we all got a very keen look at that during the global pandemic because, you know, not only did you see workers that were being impacted, but you saw schools and kids, and that was pretty much divided among socioeconomic levels where you saw certain people had a much higher impact than others. Gun violence reduction. And then you'll see one category here, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but I think it's a very important category. And in that, I just have construction contingencies, legal, project management, owner's rep. This is a new way of handling things for us as far as grants and things of nature for this particular level. So, you know, we're really going to look at bringing in outside expertise. You know, I had one commissioner tell me, Kev, why does it take 4.5 years for us to build a building and the private sector can do it in 2.5? So, you know, we're going to look at doing it in 2.5 or 3 years or whatever it takes by really leveraging outside expertise. With that, I will introduce Orrin Henry to come up and talk a little more about affordable housing and some of the projects that we have outlined for this portion. Using the button if you want to use it.
Up and down.
Left and right.
Left and right. Great. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. It's great to see you this morning. Excuse me. I want to talk a little bit about the proposed housing projects. The first one we have is one-stop housing, which would convert the old Ambassador Hotel to permanent units. It would be approximately 150 studio apartments. There is some room for some 1- and 2-bedroom apartments in that. And 15 of those units would be reserved as permanent supportive housing. And we're estimating a little over $4.1 million in city funds, but this is also very important. It's leveraging $5.8 million from the owner to make this investment in affordable housing and bringing the private sector in to help us work with this. So this is one proposed project. The next one is city acquisition, which I know you all have already approved. This is the purchase of 1246 West Jefferson Street. The intent here is to have land available for developers to construct affordable housing. And we believe up to 80 new units can be developed on that site. These funds just provide for the acquisition and environmental cleanup of that site. So we'll be seeking tax credits and other funds to develop those units. But this is an important first step. We get calls every week from developers looking for sites to put housing, and this site's just been sitting there forever, and we want to move forward on it. Hannibal Square. We've been working to try to develop a land trust model, and this is a project we've been working on a number of years to revitalize the Orange Center corridor, and we would be providing home buyer assistance to the home buyers to get into those units. The earlier presentation about how inflation's impacting things, it's certainly impacted this project, but we're hoping to add 30 units. They would all be affordable to homeowners at 80% of median or less. And the total project cost is $10.5 million, but the city's share would be a little over $3.2 million on this. And we want to get this project going vertical. In the housing department, we've identified 10 vacant lots in Paramore neighborhood, and we want to provide funding to do 10 infill houses. Once again, those would all be affordable units to residents. And I know Commissioner Hill knows we've tried to work with existing residents in Paramore or those who have strong connections to the neighborhood to come back in, and we'll want to continue to pursue that. And as also mentioned earlier, we're getting some increases in SHIP funds, so we're hoping to leverage that as well to complete that project. Also in the housing department, our meat and potatoes has always been owner-occupied rehab, and we're very happy to have SHIP funds available again. But we are behind on that, and we want to get more funding out there right away, particularly to address roofs. I know all of you are aware how it is very difficult to get insurance for your house if you don't have a sound roof on it. And it's just even worse for folks who can barely get by on their fixed incomes. So we want to move forward both in our rehab efforts and our roofing efforts, and that's underway now. And as I said, we've got additional SHIP funds, and the Accelerate Orlando funds will do just that. It'll help accelerate that program. And then lastly, we have about $500,000, which helps us to button up the rental assistance program. And that's been one, I know I've been sending reports to you weekly. Hopefully I'll be sending a final one here in the not too distant future. But we will have distributed over $18 million with that program using other funds that have been available. And this $500,000 helps us complete that so that everyone who's applied will be able to be assisted. So that's the conclusion of my section, and I believe Lisa Pertelli. There you go.
Take it from there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor.
Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning. Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, council members. I crawled out of a tent in Montana yesterday to be here because there's nowhere I'd rather be than honored to be here for what I think is an unprecedented opportunity to provide support to those organizations and that are supporting people experiencing homelessness in our community. And I'm grateful for both your consideration and your ongoing input for these recommendations, because as Chris said, they're just recommendations at this point. I need to provide a little bit of background on why I'm recommending this list. Our Regional Commission on Homelessness oversees our regional planning effort. These proposed projects are consistent with that plan, but they are prioritizing the needs of the City of Orlando. Our regional housing first efforts are proving that housing truly is the only answer. You will note that we're not proposing any expansion of shelter beds because housing first works, and we need to stay committed to it for the long haul. This doesn't mean that our shelters are not a critical part of our continuum of care, but we hope to use these funds to support their needs while working with them to provide shelter in a housing-first model with minimal barriers to access and build their capacity to provide day services during the day, which is what the City of Orlando needs. The projects outlined today are furthering the work of the Commission and the HSN's Task Force on Day Services, which I chaired over 2 years ago. That group developed strategies toward the Commission's strategic plan recommendation, which was to establish a robust front door to the housing stabilization system to create a comprehensive homeless crisis response system. Basically, that committee recommended a list of services that we need in our community to help the unsheltered population find shelter, housing, and support. So this work focuses on the need for safe spaces for the unsheltered to access services and seek respite so they're not left to wander the streets, especially while they await services, which can take time. So this is unprecedented opportunity to build the capacity of our existing organizations to help meet these needs and expedite their plans. It's data and research driven. We have some new data, too, that we've been tracking over the last 2 years. The city's Downtown Ambassador program provides critical services to the unsheltered and unique insight into the needs of those residents. Their weekly count has shown an increase in the unsheltered in the CRA district over the past 2 years. And I know everyone on this council has heard concerns from constituents throughout the city. In addition, you approved a few months ago a grant to the Service and Love Together, SALT organization, to research, to look into the impact of day services on the unsheltered and make sure that they're working and bringing people towards shelter and housing and employment as we want. With the help of our Vista Homeless Outreach Coordinator, Fabian Valentine, who's here today, SALT is researching that data, and our preliminary data demonstrates that 64% of those people receiving day services took the next step toward ending homelessness. Toward managing expectations, about 15 to 25% do go into housing or shelter. This is difficult to track and capture due to the nature of this transient population, but they do move toward housing and shelter, and it does work. But there is a service resistance group out there, and I think we all know that the challenges. In addition, we're actively participating in the Homeless Services Network Task Force on Encampments, which was formed at the urging of Commissioner Hill, where we are learning a lot about the impact of day services and their role in the ultimate goal of shelter and housing, particularly for the chronically homeless. The services outlined below offer opportunity for engagement within our continuum of care and allow the staff to build relationships that are necessary. In all cases, these services can be a diversion to arrest and incarceration. That's truly a punitive approach that's expensive and only cyclical. So lastly, on background, with one exception, these are primary capital funding requests because this is one-time funding. Not-for-profits have regular opportunities to apply for ongoing support from ESG, CDBG, Mayor's Office, and the CRA. These first two projects are ready to go, so I'll spend a little bit more time on those. These organizations, we've been working with them on these plans, and they're consistent with our goals and priorities. The remaining projects could move forward within 1 year with your approval. So this is a high-level overview. So, Christian Service Center, we are recommending about $4 million toward the Christian Service Center. Their vision is to create the city's first fully comprehensive day services center for the homeless. Orlando is the largest U.S. city without such a program. They're seeking to build on the trusted relationships they have with the unsheltered in our community by providing day services and safe space with a solid focus on shelter, housing, and employment. They want to renovate the entire campus on Central Boulevard to enhance the area, offer security, and other amenities needed to ensure the safe space for the unsheltered, and the services are needed to help them obtain treatment, benefits, and care. In addition, this safe space will require forward progress and momentum, specifically involvement in case management. Our clients will be asked to leave for a period of time. There needs to be consequences. It's important to note that it is not their intent to enable people to live on the streets, but instead to meet basic needs while moving forward with their lives. They've proven that they can help people get off the streets temporarily and permanently over the past few years. They already see 300 to 400 people a day. The entire community has been working on a day center for many years. The CRA, Thomas Chapman specifically, has helped to champion this and has been working with the Christian Service Center Board in the hopes of supporting the center. These funds would allow the city and the CRA to work together to complete the center, so it would be a partnership with our CRA. Is it this way? There we go. The Salvation Army, second one. This modernization of their men's and women's shelter, again, does not propose an expansion of shelter beds, but I'm recommending the Salvation Army and all of these other projects because this would build our capacity throughout the system to provide these critical daytime services to the unsheltered. So this is not just, okay, we're going to help you renovate the women's shelter, which is desperately needed. The men's and women's shelters need to be brought up to scale. But we'll partner with the county to modernize and upgrade the entire site. But the Salvation Army is committed to moving toward being a housing-focused shelter also, that allows those that are working toward a housing plan to remain on campus during the day. This would directly result in the reduction of 50 to 75 unsheltered person on the streets during the day. The Salvation Army renovations will also include safe rooms with private bathrooms for LGBTQ and special needs individuals who are experiencing homelessness. The simple elevator will complete the accessibility requirements and allow the shelter to be fully accessible for those with physical special needs, another desperately needed gap in our services. Aspire Health, they are proposing to open a new homeless transition and stabilist program on Gore Street in Orlando. This is just outside the Paramore District. They are our region's predominant provider of behavioral health services. The facility is currently vacant, and they will be utilizing it to alleviate the short-term symptoms of withdrawal from alcohol and drugs for people who, after a period of stabilization, 30 to 45 days, and are motivated for the treatment of their dependence, and abuse and behavioral health issues. It's important to note that the individuals currently, as they're putting this program together, they would first need to come through the Central Receiving Center, detox, or a 23-hour observation unit and be stabilized. But this would allow them to stay approximately 30 to 45 days. It's a unique opportunity to stabilize an individual and work with them on a placement that's appropriate and where they might stay. We currently don't have that. They would move to long-term residential treatment, licensed sober living housing placement, or even assisted living facilities. The Pathways Drop-In Center, again, day services for the unsheltered. Pathways Drop-In Center has been in the community for many years, providing a safe space for people who have severe mental illness during the day. You are required to have a diagnosis of a mental illness to come to the facility, but they are now under new leadership, happened during the pandemic, and they hope to redevelop the day center to provide additional safe space, more appropriate space, safe space, and the addition of permanent supportive housing on that site. So we'd like to use dollars to support the capital needs of the renovation of the Pathways Drop-In Center. That program is actually just across the street. It's outside the city of Orlando. I'm told that we can still support it because there are so many city of Orlando residents who utilize it, but it's just across the street. It's actually in the county. The county has long supported it with both capital and operational funds and expects to continue doing so. The provision of services to those who are suffering from mental illness out on our street is a severe need in our community, and this would be an important piece to bring it up to where it needs to be. Zebra Coalition is a project that actually came through the Housing Department through our CDBG process. Because of some federal restrictions there, we began to look at it through other processes. Staff have continued to work on those barriers with the federal funding, and this could end up being a partnership between these dollars and CDBG, but this would allow Zebra Coalition to convert a blighted hotel into affordable housing with support for up to 44 LGBTQ youth in 22 units. I think it's no surprise to anyone on this commission that the primary reason for homelessness between the ages of 18 and 25 is LGBTQ. So we need to have a specific facility and are grateful to have an organization whose mission focuses on that population in our community, and we'd like to support it. The Coalition for the Homeless, a very exciting project, a little bit more long-term, but they could move it forward. It's a recommendation for almost $10 million, or about $10 million from the city. They're looking at a complete renovation and change to that site. They would relocate, the current plans are to relocate the Women and Children's Shelter and take it off of Central Boulevard and move it to a different piece of land on that same city block. This is not an increase in the shelter beds, but the shelter beds would remain. They're an important part of our system, but they're looking at what I call sort of the 21st century design of a homeless shelter, which means that it's built underneath with mixed income, affordable, and permanent supportive housing on top. It looks like an apartment complex because it is an apartment complex. It's where people live, and it fits a neighborhood much nicer, and they've gone up to Jacksonville to look at a similar type of facility. So it's really a work in progress, but it's one that we're very excited about. It helps meet our needs for the area, and we're moving that along. This would also allow, again, back on day services, the transformation of their site would also allow them, their men's shelter is already a housing-focused model that allows residents to remain on site during the day, but this change could provide the physical separation needed for the coalition to enhance the day services that they currently provide. And again, continue to disperse our service providers for day services so we don't create a very large site that becomes a challenge for the neighborhood. Last one, and this is also one that's ready to move forward. I think it's important for us to continue supporting our regional leadership organization, the Commission on Homelessness and its administrative entity, the Homeless Services Network, in building their capacity and to leading us through this next challenging phase. The realignment of the Commission and the Homeless Services Network has resulted in some ongoing challenges, and the Homeless Services Network has made this request to the city and other counties, to the City of Orlando and other counties and cities in the area to support this next important phase. This funding is urgently needed now. Oh, thank you very much. Thanks. Appreciate that. So that is organizational capacity building, finance and fiscal management, facility and program improvements, the new homeless management information system, better data, a lot of changes that they need. But again, they have asked other counties and cities and have received some of that support. So if we bring that forward, we would be demonstrating that they have not only came to the City of Orlando, but have looked elsewhere. I, in closing, just want to say some of these are ready to go again, and thank you for that. I want to thank our partners. The Homeless Services Network has some 70 partnership agencies, but those specifically in the city limits are really working with us to help with the needs of the unsheltered, and I'm really grateful to that. I want to thank the Commission and Homeless Services Network staff, also our housing department, who this has truly been a partnership in working through on all of these, and as always, my city colleagues who, all of you, our elected officials and city colleagues, have truly demonstrated your compassion for this population in our community, and I'm grateful for it every day. So,
Thank you, Lisa.
And you've got me one more time. I'm going to go through the last three programs. A couple of these you're already familiar with. The first one there is the RISE program, Rapidly Improves Skills and Employability, provides job training, stipends, additional services include referrals, employment, staffing. The program is done in collaboration with a career source. I know the council is very familiar with this one. You approved this about 2.5 to 3 months ago. And this is, I will say this, the RISE program is the next logical step of what we started and the council started in 2008, 2009 in regards to the Blueprint program. So as we go through this process working with RISE, what we hope to do is continue that employability portion of it, even targeting folks who were hit not only just by the pandemic, but are just, systematically unemployed because they don't have skills. A lot of times it's a difficult task to say if you're making something, a few dollars here and there, say working temp labor, and there's an opportunity to go to school, but you can't go to school for the training because you can't afford not to still pay the rent. So the RISE program is great because it provides that stipend, and it also works and leverages Career Source, who are getting resources from the state and federal government to pay for some of that training. The next one here is the Gun Violence Prevention Program, another one that you've previously approved about 3 months ago. It's implementation of a nationally recognized evidence-based violence prevention program in targeted city neighborhoods. So once again, that was one of the priorities the mayor set forth, safety and attacking gun violence. The third one here, Broadband Access, bridging the digital divide, digital literacy, expansion of loaner devices that Council has already approved in certain neighborhoods, laptops, resilience hubs that we've talked about several times, and more importantly, LastNet Internet and leveraging the federal program, which most don't, and also providing additional Wi-Fi. I think I spoke a little bit earlier and talked about the socioeconomic impacts of what the global pandemic did. And what we saw, and through the RFPR program, we brought a lot of those kids in for tutoring, things of that nature, because they simply did not have access to broadband and decent speed Wi-Fi. You get Wi-Fi and you can have Wi-Fi, but dial-up Wi-Fi, you can't use your dial-up speed Wi-Fi, you can't keep up with your classes, you can't keep up with your programs. And a lot of the services and a lot of the things that are going, we're seeing kids that are being left further and further behind because they didn't have access. And we have pockets in our community. While everyone in our community has access in regards to being able to tap into it, we believe that we can do a little bit more as far as resiliency and things of that nature to really move this forward. The last category here that I kind of alluded to, but I didn't really go into, was the project management portion of it. This is basically funding for not only project contingency, but for legal, project management, professional owners rep, monitoring, the evaluation over a 4-year period. We realize that many of the agencies, while outstanding providing the services that they provide, lack the capacity to manage the improvements of this magnitude as far as building projects, things of that nature. We plan on retaining private sector expertise in areas such as legal, project management, and owners rep for the city, accounting staff to basically handle the grant process on how we decide to distribute this, and to do all the legal work so that, we can concentrate on things that we're good at the city, and we have professionals who are there that will concentrate on these other areas. We feel they'll not only provide professional services to ensure success, but also enhance the accountability of these issues, because we plan on coming back to this council on a regular basis with updates on the accountability of the projects that you approve. Next steps, submit budget amendments to the program for the use of the ARPA funds for revenue replacement to allocate the funding into Accelerate Orlando, retain that city project support, the owner's rep, the accounting, grant management, project managers, legal, CEI services, and then funding and other agreements related to those projects will be submitted to City Council prior to approval for implementation. And with that, I thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to us. There's been a lot of time put into trying to approach this in a logical format where we could really make a difference in the community. At this particular time, we'll entertain questions to myself or any of the members that spoke a little bit earlier today.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, Chris, Kevin, Orrin, Lisa, and all of the staff who put in time to make this information available on commission. I know that that's a lot of information conveyed in about 90 minutes. A lot of this, well, some of it you've seen before, but obviously the budget process, this is just kind of the introductory part, and you'll get more formal briefings during the course of August for additional input. And then the additional items that come through that Kevin has just discussed will all be coming before council. Again, this is more of an introductory session into those, but I feel that it really gives us an opportunity with this $58 million from the federal government to make a substantial impact in areas that, you know, we've been working on for the last 20 years here in Orlando, and to be able to get some funding to the organizations that have been doing great work in the area of homelessness and move their missions forward is critically important. And that's why I thought it was important that we allocate the money in that fashion, so that 10 years from now we can look back and know where we used our federal money and not wonder where it all went when we got it. Okay, with that, let's see, Commissioner Sheehan and then Commissioner Burns.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And I just want to say that, wow, that was really brilliant how y'all leveraged that money. I mean, to do the 58 million is a great job. I mean, so smart, so cool that you'd be able to do this to help people. This is just amazing. So y'all don't get enough kudos at the budget department, but great job. Absolutely. Absolutely. And to be able to use it to help people, and with everything else that you all do. So that's just fantastic. There was a mention of the increased budget for street lighting utility costs, and I thought when we went to LEDs that would go down. Are we still converting to LED, or why is that increase happening? Because I was just curious about that.
Sure. Great question, Commissioner. It's basically 100% related to the price increases, the recent price increases from OUC, which is the fuel increase. So it's hopefully temporary, but with the fuel prices being where they're at, it's ended up being quite a had quite an impact to us, but it's directly related to that.
Gotcha. So even with the decreased cost of LED, we're still having increased costs because of the fuel prices?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
And another comment that I had actually on sidewalks and brick repair, thank you for the $2.3 million. This is very important, but I just want to stress to our public works folks that can we please do some repairs rather than entire streets, because we need these repairs on brick streets done, not entire streets and where we just kind of blow it out all in one street instead of doing the repairs that are necessary throughout my district, especially in other districts where, you know, we have potholes and things like that. So I'd just like to thank you for that funding, but make sure that it's going to get used in the appropriate way. I also had a question on the broadband access. I know in the past, Mayor, we've had some problems when we've provided public Wi-Fi and access that the providers were angry because we were taking their customers away, so to speak. So how are we dealing with that, Kevin? You know, and because I think we should be offering it, frankly, and I like the fact that we did it, gosh, it was probably over a decade ago that we offered around Lake Yola and different places, and the Wi-Fi providers are very unhappy. The other part of it I'm concerned about, how do we, if we're going to give people access to public Wi-Fi, how do we protect their information and identity and stuff like that and not make them, you know, be victims of identity theft, because that's the last thing we want to do to our marginalized communities.
See, you're trying to take me into the deep water now.
Well, I'm sorry.
That first one, I was good. But I will answer this, and if anything else I can, I'll turn over to Mike Esarosa. But
All right.
things have changed a lot in the 15 years when we offered public Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
At this point, if someone says they're offering public Wi-Fi, we're not offering public Wi-Fi. We're paying someone to offer public Wi-Fi. So it's no longer where, you know, we as the city of Orlando have some kind of a, you know, we're extending our Wi-Fi. It's like Wi-Fi in our community centers. We used to use one local provider. We've just moved to another one. So if we do public Wi-Fi in a park or in Lake Eola or some place like that, we're paying for it.
Okay.
So it's not like it's a free one. In regard to your second question, if I remember, if I understood it appropriately, you know, we can't, so much of security on Wi-Fi, whether it's public or in your house, is what you click on. You know, it's not necessarily, you know, because, you know, most of your Wi-Fi, it's going to be based on your device. You know, you're going to have a firewall, you're going to have virus, but most of it is what did you click on. And one of the things that we're doing right now through the laptop program and the loaner program, for example, at Rosemont, when you sign out a device, we will also teach you how to use that device. We will also tell you, hey, this is security, this is why you need it. So no matter what we do, that has to be done, Commissioner, but I think there are a lot easier ways, and most of it is watch what you click on. And the other thing that we're going to do with broadband access / Wi-Fi is that the federal government has a program where they significantly provide a lot of the resources, cost on a monthly basis, for folks to have broadband if you qualify for it. And it's just not a program that folks know about, nor do they use. So we're going to try to leverage some of those existing programs. I know 10, 15 years ago, you saw where a lot of utilities were providing free Wi-Fi because, you know, especially electric, you know, utility providers, and things have changed a little bit differently since then. So hopefully I got your question. I didn't get too far wrong, and I don't see anybody back here saying no and shaking their head, so I'm going to drift off on that one.
No, perfect, thank you. And my last comment and question is, actually, I'm delighted to see that we're finally doing some day drop-in center activities, and that's what all this is directed towards, because that's the problem. I think that's what the business community is complaining about, that people can get shelter at night, but then there's nowhere folks can go during the day. So I'm very delighted to see this this investment, and also you know, for Zebra Coalition and the you know, I used to have to beg to get people to concentrate on LGBTQ youth, and to see that it's included, and I didn't have to beg for it, and that people understand that it's 18 to 24-year-olds who've been thrown out of their house because of who they are. I mean, you know, it's great to have served here long enough to see this change, and just in the way that we approach things, and you know, that's what happens when you're inclusive. So I want to thank you very much for that. And that's all I had, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and it's too bad we can't be partners with the state on that particular item. Okay, we got Commissioner Burns, Commissioner Hill, Commissioner Gray, and Commissioner Stewart in the queue.
All right, thank you, Mayor. And Chris and Michelle, I'd just like to say, job well done. Thank you for that great presentation, but also your steady hand, one in ensuring that we maintain strong reserves. I've learned a lot from just sitting down and speaking with you all, so I'd like to say thank you for that. But also, I'd just like to applaud the strategic and masterful approach in utilizing the ARPA funding, because when we did see that kind of 2-year time frame, it was concerning to be able to spend so much money in that time frame. So thank you for that approach, and I think it just highlights the skill and talents of our staff, Mayor Dyer. So just kudos to you all. Also, I just like to acknowledge all of the homeless service providers that are in the audience this morning. Thank you for what you do. I see Eric, I see Martha, and this investment in really what I see as a more sustainable approach to addressing homelessness, I think is very appropriate. As my colleague said, the day centers, the drop-in centers is something that we've talked about for a long time. So Lisa, thank you for leading that. And I'd just like to acknowledge my colleague, Commissioner Hill, for putting together that group that's looking at that those approaches. So I'm excited about where we're going. I know this is not the time to get into the details of each specific program, but I'd like to say I think we're moving in the right direction. Very, very supportive, and just look forward to getting down in the details and asking further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hill.
Thank you, Mayor Dyer, and good morning, everyone. And as everyone stated, thank you all for your leadership over there in accounting and all that you do. I just think one of the most masterful components you put there was this reverse replacement, this revenue replacement, to where we can actually decide how we're going to spend the money. You know who was the mastermind behind that? Maybe Mayor Dyer. He's so smart. But no, I'm just kidding. No, I'm not kidding, Mayor. You are.
Actually, Commissioner, when the deputy number 2 person from Treasury came down to see the RISE program,
Yeah.
he conferred, Chris and I had lunch with him, and he said this is exactly what we meant to do with the money. May not say that in the proviso that Congress laid out, but as far as Treasury is concerned, this is exactly what we want you guys to do, is have the maximum flexibility.
So thank you all for your leadership. And Mayor, thanks for your leadership with understanding the urgency of now with putting all these funds towards those that have been displaced, those that need a hand up, not a handout, because this is what this is, basically. And also our service providers there that work in this space with Eric Gray taught me something, experiencing homelessness, right? And of course, Captain Martha. I know you guys here for the last at least 5-6 months have been meeting consistently, weekly, with putting a plan forth on how to, I like this, accelerate Orlando, but I also say elevate Orlando, because that's what you're doing with this particular project of Accelerate Orlando. Thank you also, Lisa. I know sometimes I beat you up bad. I apologize, but this is just what I wanted to see, because this doesn't just impact and improve the lives of those experiencing homelessness, but those that live in these communities where this homeless situation and crisis is. And the community has been just like the downtowners, those in the Paramore neighborhoods, and now all throughout Orlando where we see this happening, have been wanting to see us move forward aggressively. I'm glad that we're putting some structure in place. I know we talked about it, Erica, some type of a voucher program where we're not continuing to enable people to be comfortable and homeless, but putting some structure in place outside of those that are suffering from some type of substance abuse and mental health crises, but now adding that component of working with our community partners like Inspire, and even putting wraparound services there in, I would say, triaging these residents, and then treating right after we triage, and then giving them productive and sustainable lives again, and hopefully reconnecting. I would like to see as we move forward, some type of discussion about reconnection with families, because many of our folks experiencing homelessness aren't local. They've wandered here to Florida, into our areas where we do have, I think, some of the best social and progressive programs throughout the nation, but to make sure they can get back home to their loved ones again and see how that can work, Martha. And then, of course, this being an all-inclusive program, and I think also with the Ambassador Hotel and that one-stop organization that's not just providing housing, but they are also doing wraparound services. So everything being connected, and that's not the last stop for those residents. And with our RISE program, I mean, this puzzle is just fitting quite nicely as we push this Accelerate Orlando initiative. And lastly, you know, home ownership. To see this home ownership being a part of this also, Mayor, and down payment assistance. I think we're going from, I would say, a true component from poverty with the homeless component to wealth, because we know wealth building comes with home ownership. So I'm just proud to be a part of this council, proud to be a part of our team, because they're not staff to me, they're our team members, by helping us do this work, which isn't easy, but, you know, a little money don't hurt. So you can get a lot done with 58 million. So congratulations on how you all have really maximized this 58 million to where it's almost, I would say 116 million, it almost looked like. So thank you. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Gray?
Thank you, Mayor. Michelle, I got a couple questions for you. Thank you. So as I look at this proposed budget, you're talking about what amounts to a $93 million increase, which on a blended between the two buckets is about 6%. Fair?
93 million.
It's 10% in the general fund and I think 4% in the other fund, the specific fund. So my point is, this is a big number, $93 million increase. And I guess the struggle I have is every year we do the budget, we never see actuals from the year before. We just see budgets. And so I guess before I go too much further, I'd love to see how we're doing actually versus what we budgeted the last couple of years. And the best example would be page 28, which is our public safety, which is our biggest category, right? You look at that, all we're doing is we're talking about positions allocated. We don't know which positions are filled. And since that's such a big component of our budget, I mean, I have a sense we're not filling all the open positions. So there may be some savings in there that we're not achieving, or we need to push harder on recruitment, but one of those two. But I guess my point is, budgets are great, but you got to be able to compare actual year to year to what you budgeted the prior year. So, you know, again, as we're talking today about a proposed millage rate, I don't know how to react to that, because there might be an argument we reduce the millage rate. There might be an argument we raise the millage rate. I don't know. If you don't have actuals, I don't know how you can tell where you stand. So that's just my general comment on the budget. Do we want to talk about Accelerate, Mayor, or do you want me to wait till everybody else gets questions on?
No, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Kevin, I guess, is the one I'd like to ask. So, or maybe you, Michelle. So this is $58 million that we're kind of reallocating, as I understand, which part of me thinks that's pretty creative, and congratulations. The other part is, do we have any hesitation that the federal government may come back and say, wait a minute, we didn't give you every grant that I've ever seen from the federal government has a specific border and requirements. This one, we're saying, thank you very much, Washington. We'll kind of reallocate that into things. So is that a concern? Chris?
Initially, it was a concern. We've sat through several webinars with representatives from the Treasury Department. Those were hosted by the National League of Cities, National Association of Counties. The message has been consistent that they encourage local governments to use the revenue replacement category if they're running into challenges. This is something that we specifically brought up in our conversations as well, that there were some federal restrictions that could have made some of these projects that you heard about more difficult. And I'm glad, thank you for the question, because it gives me the opportunity to say, I want to give credit to the City Attorney's Office, Mayanne Downs, Jody Litchford, in particular, Lisa Pearson, Chief Assistant City Attorney. She is one of our experts in federal grants. She's the one that first said, you know, there's some federal restrictions here that may make some of the things on this list very difficult. She encouraged us to look at the revenue replacement option. At the same time, the Treasury was issuing their final rule, which laid out a little more detail about how the revenue replacement provision could be used. So, Commissioner, I started off a little skeptical, you know, but at this point, hearing what I've heard, both directly from the Treasury, National League of Cities, the State League of Cities, I'm much more comfortable with this plan. In fact, I actually think, you know, because it's so clearly and squarely in line with the guidance, it's actually, I feel better about it now than potentially trying to shoehorn some of these other projects in, knowing that we have these federal rules that could potentially trip us up.
Commissioner, I had some concerns at the beginning, but when you have the number 2 guy at Treasury say, you guys are doing exactly what we want you to do, I feel
Then we'll
better.
take high marks for creativity. That's good. The other thing I would say, Chris, and while you're there, I know it may not be your slide, but as we go through these, and this is the first time I've heard it, and again, a lot of good, feel-good programs in place, but again, you guys know I'm a numbers guy, but like on page 12, the thing that just jumped out at me is when you look at those 2 projects, like under workforce housing, et cetera, Hannibal Square, you're gonna spend a total cost of $10.5 million, and you're gonna get 30 units, right? It comes from different sources, not all from the city. That's $352,000 a unit, simple math. That's not affordable. The one below that, city housing, where we're gonna spend $3 million on 10 units, again, I know these have to come back for specific approval, but that's $300,000 a unit. Certainly we can build 10 houses cheaper than $300,000 a unit. Well, the average house in Orlando is $250, and we're going to build new ones for $300? I don't think that's affordable, but maybe I'm wrong on that. But I think we got to dig down on the numbers a little bit, because if we're going to get this kind of money and have the greatest impact, I just think we got to be careful how much we're spending in different areas, because that seems to be a lot of money for affordable.
Yeah, understood.
So,
Commissioner, I hear you on that, but the average median house price now is like $340.
Yes.
yeah, wow, okay. And I guess the last one, Chris, is as we go through this, as we start these initiatives, again, some are for capital improvements, which is good. Some are for counseling, training, et cetera. When this money runs out, are we kind of putting ourselves in a bucket to be prepared to continue to fund? If not, we're going to have a lot of disappointed people, I think.
Yeah, that's always something we consider when we talk about programs that have ongoing operational costs. I think coming out of the pandemic is kind of a unique time. This money's been programmed to help people who are hardest hit by the pandemic, and so we think it's the right way to program the money, and we hope that it achieves some good outcomes, but we'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. I will say that we have done the Blueprint 2.0 funding for year after year after year for the last probably 5 or 6 years at least. And so we do this on a smaller level. And so if we can tackle the larger numbers of people that have been economically impacted by the pandemic now with this money, you know, hopefully there's fewer people needing the services in the future if we're successful. But it's a legitimate concern.
And I said last crack, I do have one more. How do we as a group earmark or point these towards folks here in the city? In other words, it's a city allocation, right? So it's a taxpayer, you would think, hey, let's send it on city issues. But almost by definition, if you're homeless, you could be anywhere in Central Florida. So how do we deal with that concept?
Yeah, that's not my area of expertise, so I don't want to give bad information. I know particularly with the Blueprint 2.0 in the past, that has been directed towards city residents, and we do get reporting on that the city residents participating, which district they live in, and surprisingly, it actually covers all 6 districts. That's information I got from Commissioner Hill, which is surprising, the geographic diversity of the people that participate in the Blueprint 2.0. So for the RISE program, I think we would probably anticipate something similar. But for the homeless impacts, it's a very complicated situation. It's beyond my area of expertise. I don't know if anybody wants to.
Because my sense is not every city is making this kind of commitment that we are. And so I would think as word gets out in Central Florida, naturally folks will say, I need to get to Orlando and get some of these. So I just bring that up. That's an interesting challenge, I think, for us.
Yep. Good.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. Let me just share a couple of things. First, thank you to staff. This is yeoman's work. And I know that the moment we finish in September with the new budget, this budget, you'll start with next year's budget because it happens that quickly. I'm not going to repeat a lot of stuff that's been said in the council, but I do like the idea of the actuals. I know that some of your graphs include some of that data, so I just like to look at that. And I think that'll come with the executive summary, I hope, that we typically get prior to the budget.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Stewart, and Commissioner Gray. I meant to comment on your comments earlier about the actuals. We submit quarterly budget to actual reports to you every quarter. So you see that periodically, but it's not in the same format as what we put up on the screen today. So let us spend some time on our one-on-ones with you. We are on your calendars in the next few weeks. We can do more focus on the actuals and kind of show you where we're at. Comments on, vacancy rates, things like that are all, they're fair. But we have built a budget around the services that we are expected to provide our citizens. Admittedly, we struggle with retention and recruitment right now, and that puts some additional challenges in trying to maintain those high service levels. But we built a budget that, if we were fully staffed, we would be able to continue to provide those service levels. But I will show you the actuals when we sit down. But I think it's no surprise that we struggle a little bit today with employee retention and recruitment.
Well, and that's, I think the retention and recruitment is the biggest issue. I know that we're having some issues in the fleet and fleet management, keeping our vehicles rolling. That's an important concern I have. And I don't know how we get across that, because I think I'm seeing that in every facet of our economy. So it's not just a city, but if we got vehicles broken down, especially in waste management, it puts an additional burden on trying to run trucks in the evening, trying to do whatever it takes in terms of getting the stuff picked up. So that's it's chicken and the egg in a sense, but both have to be addressed in a pretty aggressive manner.
Yes, sir. And since you brought up solid waste, that's been something we've spent a lot of time on lately. It's a combination both of staffing, but also issues related to global supply chain issues. Waiting for parts to come over on a barge. That is new to us, and so trying to find ways to work with what we've got to get those trucks back up and running. It's a challenging time right now on a couple of different angles.
Well, and I agree with you. It's just that what happens in our office is we get the complaint that it's not being served.
Right.
And we need to have a better understanding of what the plan is to make that happen. So putting money in fleet management, to me, is just not quite good enough. I mean, I'd like to know, what are we doing in terms of retention management, not only in terms of police and fire, public safety, but also in terms of those critical services that we provide to our own staff to make them work.
And if you're pointing out the fleet management line in the budget chart today, there's sort of two main drivers of that. One is the fleet replacement costs. When a vehicle is at the end of its useful life, we're now spending maybe 20% more than we might have been spending a year ago or pre-pandemic to replace that police car or that F-150 and FPR. That's happening. The price increases are really significant on the expensive vehicles, the fire engines and solid waste vehicles. And then the other piece is we flow fuel through the fleet fund. So it's the the fleet fund pays for fuel, and then we charge it out to the departments. So those are the two main drivers of why you see fleet increases. There aren't significant increases in staffing in fleet, but those are the two drivers of the fleet fund.
I appreciate it. I want to touch on a couple of other things. The revenue estimates that we talked about before, they always concern me. Having done budgets for all my entire life, you overestimate, or you underestimate revenue, overestimate expenses. So I would like to look at that a little bit more carefully, because when you have a significant number of $8 or $10 or $12 million in one particular category, I kind of want to make sure that that's really going to happen.
Sure.
Because, and I think, having dealt with you for so long, and you and Michelle, that really is probably a very conservative number. But I'd like to kind of make sure I feel comfortable that it's a conservative number as well.
We can spend some time in our one-on-ones going through. I'll tell you, our philosophy is always to have conservative budgeting processes. We never want to come to you mid-year and say, we messed up on a line, we got to cut something mid-year, and the rating agencies always give us extra credit for our conservative budgeting throughout the year. So I appreciate you bringing that up, but we can dive deeper in that in our one-on-ones.
Let me also say thanks to homeless service providers that are here. Thank you, Eric. Thank you. I know that Ken has left, and I see some others around. One of the key issues that our city does is we actually can have an impact. This is a great way to have an impact very quickly. I know it'll come back to us, and there's a lot of questions there. I do feel a little bit like Commissioner Gray, and I look at the total numbers and divide the numbers by the units provided, and determine where else can we leverage the money to make it better for us. I mean, a good example is the Ambassador Hotel. Put in $4.1 million into a $14 million project. Lets us leverage our money to make sure we get the maximum coverage that we can. So that's an important thing, and I appreciate the work that they do. The last thing I want to touch on, and I know that Commissioner Sheehan talked about it, is the broadband access. That's a real concern of mine. Let me tell you why. The state of Florida has tried to put their fingers into the broadband distribution. Don't know how it's shaken out, but it seems that every year there's something that comes up in terms of how the distribution happens, who gets it, who gets to do it. It is abusive how they try to take that information, to take that process away from cities to accomplish that task. So I'd love to make sure we work with the Florida League of Cities and what we're doing to provide broadband access to every person in our city and every pocket that is not being currently served. And I appreciate that commitment. And then the last thing is the day center. Some of y'all on the council know that in 2005 we wrote a plan. I had the opportunity to help author that plan. And in that we ask about providing day services. It is a once in a generation opportunity this kind of funding comes through. And I want to make sure that our leadership, backtrack. The best day centers, there are multiple day centers in a community. I would like to have the city take the lead on the first, but the other day centers need to come out to the county and the outlying area. If we create a place where there's a convention downtown, it doesn't help with the ability to serve that population. So at least I don't know what the county's planning on doing, but I'd love to work with you a little closely, see if I can help do that.
Just to make sure everyone's aware, Matthews Hope is a day center that operates out on the west side of the county, and Samaritan Resource Center is a day center that currently operates on the east side. So there are two others out there that are supported by the county. But they are also looking at supporting the city.
And what's happening, I mean, the answer is what's happening in Apopka. I know there's a couple of other areas up there, but they aren't adequate. And then what's happening in Southwest Matthews Hope, because I'm very familiar with all that. Matthews Hope really only has a very small geographical area that they handle. And you need 5, 6, 7 around the community, all of them properly funded and served, and all of them provided in connection with the Homeless Services Network, which is a great opportunity for us to continue to make that work. So, I just want to make sure we're doing our part for citizens of Orlando, but there's 4.2 million in the region, there's 1.4 million in the county, And we want to do the best for our 320,000, but we want to make sure we're leading the way for others to do the same kind of thing. So,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hill?
Yes, Mayor. With all due respect, Commissioner Stewart, I know you're an expert in this space here by your long service to the community. But I've been working about 4 years with staff traveling around Florida, championing these day centers that have worked with the community. So with all due respect, you'll work with me. It is in my district, and we'll work with the team that we already have in place.
Commissioner Ortiz, I want to acknowledge that you're present.
Thank you, Mayor.
Did you have any comments?
No. I'm not very kind of indisposed, so I'm just going to hold my comments for the next meeting, but thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner, I want to thank all of you for the hard work and unique perspectives that you bring from different areas of our great city. And I'd like to have all our finance staff stand up and let us thank you guys. Okay, and without objection, we'll be adjourned.